The Sunday Guardian, Sarah Morrison looked like any other 28-year-old seminary graduate serving her first church until the moment armed extremists burst through the doors, and she had to choose between her cover identity and saving 147 innocent lives. Welcome to Hidden Valor Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of faith, duty, and the complex choices we make when two worlds collide, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between protecting a secret and protecting people you care about? And if you believe that sometimes the most sacred missions require the deepest sacrifices, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who serve in ways both seen and unseen. Sunday morning, November 15, 2020. St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Culpeper County, Virginia prepared for its traditional 11 a.m. service as it had for 133 years. The white stone sanctuary, nestled among rolling hills 40 miles southwest of Washington, D.C., represented everything peaceful about small-town America, a place where faith, community, and tradition intersected in weekly worship. At the organ bench, 28-year-old Sarah Catherine Morrison ran through her prelude one final time, her fingers dancing across keys that had become as familiar as prayer itself. In 3 years at St. Michael's, Sarah had become beloved by the congregation, a young woman who'd chosen ministry over the lucrative opportunities her Georgetown University music degree could have provided. At least, that's what everyone believed. The truth was considerably more complex. Sarah Morrison was indeed a Georgetown graduate, but her degree in international relations had led not to seminary, but to CIA training at Camp Peary. Agent Catherine Morrison, operational codename Songbird, had been assigned to St. Michael's as part of a deep cover operation monitoring domestic extremist networks that recruited from rural Virginia communities. For 3 years, Sarah had lived a carefully constructed double life. By day, she played hymns, taught Sunday school, and organized church dinners. By night, she monitored encrypted communications, tracked financial transactions, and built psychological profiles of the extremist cell known as the American Purity Movement, a group that believed traditional institutions like churches had been corrupted and needed to be purified through fire. The irony wasn't lost on her that protecting American churches required infiltrating one. "Sarah, you're early again," called Reverend Williams as he entered the sanctuary carrying his sermon notes. At 52, he'd been St. Michael's pastor for 8 years, long enough to appreciate the young organist who'd transformed their music program. "I like the quiet time before service," Sarah replied, which was true. She also used the time to conduct security sweeps, check for surveillance equipment, and monitor communications from Langley. But the peaceful moments before worship had become genuinely precious to her, a respite from the constant vigilance that characterized her real job. What had begun as professional necessity had evolved into something more personal. Sarah had grown to genuinely care about this congregation, these people who trusted her with their spiritual lives while having no idea she was protecting their physical ones. "Any word on the new security system?" Reverend Williams asked, settling into the front pew to review his sermon. "The company will install it next week," Sarah lied smoothly. There was no security company. The upgrades would be CIA surveillance equipment designed to monitor the church for the very threats Sarah had been tracking for months. Because according to intercepted communications, the American Purity Movement had finally chosen their target for what they called Operation Righteous Fire, a coordinated attack on multiple rural churches designed to trigger a nationwide crisis of faith in traditional institutions. St. Michael's was on the list. Sarah had spent weeks trying to determine which Sunday they would strike, analyzing patterns in their communications, studying their operational methodology. But domestic terrorist cells were frustratingly unpredictable, driven more by ideology than tactical precision. The congregation began arriving at 10:45, their familiar voices filling the sanctuary with the comfortable sounds of community gathering. The Hendersons, married 52 years, took their customary seats third row right. The Yamamoto family, newest members after relocating from California, settled in back with their twin toddlers. Mrs. Patterson, 91 and the church's oldest member, was helped to her usual spot near the altar. Sarah knew them all intimately, not just their names and preferences, but their routines, their relationships, their vulnerabilities. Information gathered initially for operational purposes had become genuine affection. These weren't targets to protect, they were family. At 10:58 a.m., Sarah began her prelude, Vox Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, and watched the congregation settle into the peaceful rhythm of Sunday worship. At 11:03 a.m., her carefully constructed world exploded. The first sign was subtle. 3 men entering during the opening prayer, moving with purpose through the center aisle. Sarah's training kicked in immediately, her fingers continuing Bach while her mind shifted into threat assessment mode. These weren't late worshippers. She recognized them from surveillance photos. Marcus Webb, 34, cell leader with military background. Tommy Kane, 29, explosive specialist with anti-government convictions. Jake Morrison, 26, weapons expert, no relation despite the shared surname. The American Purity movement had finally made their move. Sarah felt the familiar ice-cold calm of operational mode settling over her. 3 years of deep cover, months of tracking, weeks of analysis, all leading to this moment when her two identities would collide in the sanctuary she'd learned to love. The men separated with professional efficiency. Webb moved toward the front, positioning himself with clear sight lines to the altar and choir loft. Kane headed to the back, controlling the main entrance. Morrison took the side chapel, blocking the secondary exit. Classic killbox formation. They were preparing to massacre 147 innocent people, including the 12 children under 10 years old who attended Sunday school before service. Sarah's mind raced through options while her hands played hymns and her face maintained the serene expression of a devoted organist. She could trigger the panic button in her purse, alerting her CIA handlers, but response time would be 8 to 12 minutes. She could attempt to evacuate the congregation, but the exits were already controlled. She could try to neutralize the threats herself, but that would mean revealing 3 years of carefully constructed cover. Most critically, she had to choose: maintain her mission to monitor domestic terrorism or abandon it to save the people who'd become her community. The congregation began singing "Holy, Holy, Holy," their voices raised in praise, unaware they were about to die. Reverend Williams stood at the pulpit reading from the Book of Common Prayer, trusting in God's protection and the safety of his house. Sarah Morrison played organ and made the hardest choice of her life. She was choosing the congregation. As the hymn reached its second verse, Sarah activated systems the congregation didn't know existed. Her smartphone, equipped with CIA communication protocols, sent a priority alert to Langley: Operation Songbird compromised. 3 hostiles inside target location, initiating protective measures. The response came immediately: maintain cover, support inbound, avoid engagement. Sarah deleted the message and prepared to violate direct orders. Her fingers found the master controls for the church's recently upgraded electronic systems: sound, lighting, climate, and security equipment that served dual purposes. What the congregation saw as modern conveniences, Sarah used as tactical advantages. But first, she had to try saving lives without revealing her identity. Sarah transitioned smoothly from hymn to announcement, her voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary's sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received word of a gas leak in the building. Please move calmly and quickly to the parish hall through the passage behind the altar. This is not a drill. It was a calculated gamble. The evacuation story might work if the cell hadn't fully committed to their attack timeline. But as soon as she spoke, Sarah saw Webb reaching into his jacket. The peaceful Sunday morning shattered. Webb emerged with an AR-15, his voice cutting through the sanctuary. Nobody moves, everybody down. Kane and Morrison drew weapons simultaneously, trapping the congregation in coordinated crossfire. Screams echoed off stone walls as 147 people realized their sanctuary had become a slaughter pen. On the ground now, Webb shouted, his rifle sweeping the terrified crowd. This is the American Purity movement. Today we cleanse this corruption. Sarah had perhaps 30 seconds before they began executing hostages. 30 seconds to make a choice that would define not just her mission, but her soul. She chose truth over lies, protection over protocol, love over duty. Agent Catherine Morrison went to war. Sarah's first move was acoustic warfare. She activated the church's sound system at maximum volume and triggered the organ's deepest bass frequencies, subsonic waves that would disorient the attackers while being barely audible to the congregation. The stone walls amplified and focused the sound, creating spatial confusion that would degrade tactical performance. Her second move was visual disruption. She killed the main lights and activated emergency strobes, making precision shooting nearly impossible while giving her intermittent illumination to move through familiar territory. Her third move was psychological. Through the sound system she now controlled, Sarah spoke with the command authority she'd learned at Camp Peary. This is Sarah Morrison. I am a federal agent. Armed terrorists have entered the sanctuary. Move immediately to the parish hall through the passage behind the altar. Reverend Williams will guide you. Do not panic. Do not run. Move quickly and quietly." The congregation, shocked by their organist's transformation but trusting her leadership, began an organized evacuation. Reverend Williams, understanding that his quiet music minister had just revealed herself as something else entirely, shepherded people toward the hidden passage with remarkable calm. Webb fired 3 shots toward the organ loft, but Sarah was already moving. 3 years of studying every inch of this building now paid tactical dividends as she used shadows, architectural features, and hidden passages to stay ahead of men who thought they were hunting a civilian target. "Where the hell is she?" Kane shouted, his rifle tracking empty shadows. "The organist," Morrison replied. "She's not civilian, she's law enforcement." "Then we kill her first," Webb decided. "Kane, secure the hostages. Morrison, find the girl." But the girl was already implementing phase 2 of her defensive strategy. Sarah reached the church office through a maintenance corridor, accessing the computer terminal she'd secretly modified during her 3 years of service. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, activating surveillance systems that officially didn't exist. "Langley, this is Songbird. Cover is blown. 3 Alpha hostiles, domestic terror cell, 107 civilians in immediate danger. Requesting immediate tactical support." The response crackled through her earpiece. "Songbird, maintain position, support team en route, ETA 12 minutes, do not engage." "Negative," Sarah replied. "Engagement is already in progress." She cut the connection and prepared to violate every protocol in the CIA operational manual. Sarah moved through St. Michael's like an avenging angel, using the building she'd learned to love as a tactical advantage against those who would defile it. Every Sunday spent in these halls, every evening organizing church events, every moment building relationships, all of it now served to protect the people who'd become her family. The first confrontation came in the nave, where Morrison was advancing toward the evacuating congregation. Sarah intercepted him using close-quarters combat techniques, striking from concealment with precision designed to neutralize without killing. The fight lasted 15 seconds. When it ended, Morrison was unconscious, secured with cable from the sound system Sarah knew better than most professional installers. Kane, hearing the struggle, abandoned his position to investigate. Sarah was waiting behind the massive pipe organ, using the instrument she'd played for 3 years as both cover and weapon. This fight was more challenging. Kane was stronger, better trained, and fighting for ideological conviction. But Sarah had advantages he couldn't anticipate. Intimate knowledge of the space, absolute determination to protect innocent people, and 3 years of guilt about lying to people who trusted her. She struck with techniques learned at Camp Peary, applied with emotional intensity she'd never experienced in training. When Kane fell unconscious, Sarah felt no satisfaction, only grim necessity. Webb, realizing his team was being systematically eliminated, made a tactical retreat to the altar area, where he began assembling what looked like an explosive device among the communion elements. "Show yourself," he screamed into the strobing darkness. "I'll kill every person in this building." Sarah emerged from the shadows, her hands visible, her voice calm. Marcus Webb, American Purity Movement cell leader, age 34, former Army infantry discharged for extremist activities. Webb's rifle swung toward her, but his hands were shaking, whether from the subsonic frequency effects or psychological stress, Sarah couldn't determine. "You're the Fed," he said. 3 years you've been watching us." 3 years, Sarah confirmed. "And in that time, this congregation became my family." "You're threatening my family, Marcus." "They're all corrupt," Webb shouted. "These churches, these communities, they've abandoned traditional values. We're here to purify." "You're here to murder innocent people," Sarah interrupted. "Children, grandparents, families who gather to worship and support each other. There's nothing pure about that." Webb's finger tightened on the trigger, but Sarah was already moving. 3 years of altar service had taught her the exact layout of the communion area, every step, every obstacle, every potential weapon. The brass cross she grabbed wasn't just a sacred symbol, it was 3 pounds of solid metal wielded by someone trained in improvised weapons combat. The final confrontation lasted 30 seconds. When it ended, Webb was unconscious at the foot of the altar, his explosive device disarmed, his weapon secured. Sarah stood in the silence of the sanctuary, breathing hard, surrounded by the evidence of violence in a place she'd learned to consider sacred. Emergency lights painted everything in stark relief, broken furniture, scattered hymnals, and 3 domestic terrorists who had failed to destroy what they'd come to purify. In the distance, sirens approached. Langley support was arriving, along with local law enforcement who would spend hours trying to understand how a church organist had single-handedly neutralized a terrorist cell. Sarah looked around the sanctuary one last time, knowing that her life here was over. Agent Catherine Morrison would be extracted, debriefed, and reassigned. Sarah Morrison, beloved church organist, would disappear into classified files and operational legend. But for 3 years she had been both. And in choosing to protect rather than observe, she had discovered which identity mattered most. The next 2 hours passed in controlled chaos as federal agents, local police, and emergency medical teams transformed St. Michael's peaceful country setting into a secure operational zone. Sarah sat in the parish hall, wrapped in a blanket someone had provided, watching her congregation slowly process the revelation that their gentle organist was a federal agent who had just saved their lives. CIA Deputy Director Patricia Chen arrived personally to conduct the debrief, unusual for a blown cover operation, but the circumstances were anything but routine. "Agent Morrison," Director Chen said, settling into the chair across from Sarah, "your operational security has been completely compromised. 3 years of deep cover, months of intelligence gathering on domestic terrorist networks, all gone." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "Yes, ma'am. You violated direct orders to maintain position and await support." "Yes, ma'am. You engaged 3 armed hostiles in close-quarters combat without backup." "Yes, ma'am." Director Chen studied Sarah's face, noting the calm acceptance rather than defensiveness. "Why?" Sarah looked around the parish hall where 147 people, her people, were being comforted by chaplains and crisis counselors. Mrs. Patterson was holding the Yamamoto twins, making them laugh despite the trauma. The Hendersons were organizing coffee for the emergency responders, because that's what church people do in crisis. "Because they became real," Sarah said quietly. "For 3 years I was supposed to maintain emotional distance, treat them as assets to protect rather than people to care about. But you can't live among people that long, worship with them, share their joys and sorrows, without them becoming family. And when family was threatened, I chose family over mission." Director Chen was quiet for a moment, processing the complexity of an agent who had completed her objective, stopping a domestic terrorist attack by destroying her operational effectiveness. "Reverend Williams would like to speak with you," she said finally. "The congregation is asking questions about who you really are, what your time here meant." Sarah felt her composure crack for the first time since the crisis began. How do I explain that everything was a lie? That their organist, their friend, their spiritual sister was really a federal agent using them for operational cover? Was it all a lie? Sarah thought about 3 years of Sunday mornings, of playing hymns that had become genuine prayers, of pastoral conversations that had shaped her own faith, of community service that had taught her what she was really protecting. "No," she said finally, "the Sarah Morrison who played organ and taught Sunday school, she was real too, I just didn't know it at the time." Director Chen nodded. "Agent Morrison, you have a choice to make. We can extract you tonight, provide new identity and assignment, let Sarah Morrison disappear into operational legend, or you can try to integrate both identities. Resign from active field work, accept a consulting position that would allow you to remain in this community, help them understand that federal agents are people too, people who sometimes discover that the lives they're protecting matter more than the missions they're completing." Sarah looked at Reverend Williams, who was approaching with the careful expression of a pastor trying to understand how his organist had transformed into a federal agent but was still the same person who'd played Amazing Grace at his mother's funeral 6 months earlier. "Sarah," Reverend Williams said gently, "the congregation would like to know, are you staying?" For 3 years Sarah had lived carefully constructed lies in service of protecting truth. Now she had the opportunity to tell the truth in service of protecting the relationships those lies had built. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've been Agent Morrison so long I'm not sure I remember how to be just Sarah." "Maybe," Reverend Williams suggested, "you don't have to choose between them. Maybe you can be both." 6 months later, Sarah Morrison published a piece in the diocesan newsletter titled "Finding Truth Through Service." She didn't reveal classified information or operational details, but wrote about the journey from professional duty to personal calling, from protecting people as objects to loving them as family. "Service," she wrote, taught me that the most important truths aren't the ones we're trained to gather, but the ones we discover by living authentically among people we grow to love. The piece was reprinted in law enforcement publications, intelligence community newsletters, and seminary journals across the country. Sarah received hundreds of letters from other agents struggling to balance professional duty with personal connection. She answered every one. Sarah continued as St. Michael's organist, but her role expanded to include security consulting for religious communities. The attack had highlighted vulnerabilities that existed in churches nationwide, places of worship that welcomed everyone but were unprepared for those who came with evil intentions. Working with both CIA resources and local law enforcement, Sarah developed training programs that helped religious communities recognize threats while maintaining the open, welcoming atmosphere that made faith communities special. Security isn't about building walls, she told a gathering of church administrators. It's about being prepared to protect the sacred spaces where people come to heal. Director Chen became a frequent visitor to St. Michael's, drawn by the theological discussions Sarah led in adult education classes. Together they explored questions about duty and love, service and sacrifice, the complex ethics of protecting people who don't know they need protection. "You've become something unique," Director Chen observed during one visit. An agent who chose transparency over operational security, love over professional distance. "Maybe that's what real security looks like," Sarah replied, "not hiding from the people you're protecting, but being willing to be vulnerable with them." On the first anniversary of the attack, St. Michael's held a special service of thanksgiving, not for the violence that had come to their sanctuary, but for the protection that had kept them safe, the community that had sustained them, and the understanding that sometimes God's protection comes through the hands of those trained to fight. Sarah played Amazing Grace as the closing hymn, her fingers moving across keys that had carried her through deception, revelation, crisis, and integration. The congregation sang with voices strengthened by surviving together, their harmony a testament to trust rebuilt and relationships deepened by truth. After the service, a young woman approached Sarah, a recent CIA graduate struggling with her first undercover assignment. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I heard about what happened here, about your choice. I'm having trouble figuring out how to care about my mission without caring about the people." Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from Agent Morrison to Sarah Morrison to someone who could be both. "The caring isn't the problem," Sarah said gently. "The caring is the point. You don't stop being professional because you start being personal. You become more effective because you understand what you're really protecting." "How do I maintain operational security while building real relationships?" Sarah gestured toward the sanctuary, where families shared coffee and conversation, where children played among pews that had sheltered worship for 133 years, where community had proven stronger than the forces that tried to destroy it. "You remember that the mission isn't about maintaining distance," Sarah said. "It's about getting close enough to know what's worth protecting. And then you protect it with everything you have, your training, your skills, and your heart." Sarah Morrison continued playing organ at St. Michael's Church, but her life expanded far beyond Sunday morning music. She became a bridge between the intelligence community and faith communities, helping both understand that protection and trust could coexist. Her consulting work prevented 3 additional attacks on religious institutions, using intelligence gathered through community relationships rather than traditional surveillance. Sarah had discovered that people shared information more freely with someone they trusted than with someone they feared. The CIA developed new protocols based on Sarah's experience, guidelines for agents whose cover identities required genuine community engagement. The Morrison doctrine emphasized that effective protection sometimes required authentic relationship, that the best intelligence came from people who felt valued rather than manipulated. Sarah's story became a case study at Quantico and Camp Peary, illustrating the complex relationship between duty and love, mission and community, professional obligation and personal calling. She never married but found family in abundance, the congregation that had accepted her truth, the intelligence community that had learned from her choices, and the network of churches that benefited from her unique understanding of both faith and security. In 2030, 10 years after the attack, Sarah was invited to speak at the CIA's annual memorial service honoring agents who had made extraordinary sacrifices in service to their country. "Agent Morrison didn't die for her mission," the director said in his introduction. "She chose to live authentically within it. She discovered that the most effective protection comes not from hiding among the people you serve, but from being willing to be known by them." Sarah's speech was brief but profound. I learned that truth and duty aren't opposites, they're partners. The mission isn't about maintaining perfect cover. It's about being trustworthy enough that people let you into their lives, and loving them enough that you'd give anything to keep them safe. Today, a small plaque near the organ at St. Michael's Church reads, "In honor of Sarah Morrison, who taught us that the most beautiful music comes from hands that know both how to create and how to protect, from hearts that choose both truth and love." Sarah Morrison never became a famous spy, never saved the world from international conspiracies, never had her exploits dramatized in Hollywood films. But every Sunday for over a decade, she played hymns that helped people find peace. And when evil came to destroy that peace, she protected it with skills she'd learned in service to her country and love she'd discovered in service to her community. Sometimes the most sacred mission is learning that duty and love aren't opposites. They're harmony. The end. So now I ask you, have you ever had to choose between protecting a secret and protecting people you care about? Have you met someone who seemed to live a simple life, only to discover they carried responsibilities you never imagined? Share your thoughts about the people in your community who might be serving in ways you don't see. Tell us about the guardians who watch over the places where you worship, learn, and find peace. Because here at Hidden Valor Stories, we believe that the most effective protection comes from authentic love. Thank you for watching this story of Sarah Morrison and the choice between duty and truth. If this touched your heart, subscribe and help us honor those who serve in ways both secret and sacred. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful service comes from being willing to be known by the people you protect.